Good evening and welcome to Reading Grounds. It is June 30th, 2019. Looks like Kimmery and Shelby are already here on the stream. Thanks so much for coming out, ladies. Always nice to have you here. I wasn't even sure if you guys were going to show up this week, given that you were, out of town and all. But always glad to have you. Last week on the stream, we read The Maiden Without Hands, a grim fairy tale. We also read Snow White, which is another grim fairy tale, and we talked a little bit about poetry. As of late, I've been back in school, and thankfully, because I, I, because I've been in school, I've been able to use some of the stuff that I learned there for the stream. Been able to talk about some of the poetry and go into that a little bit. Unfortunately, this past week, I did not have any classes at all. We were supposed to have a class Monday, but the teacher canceled because she had to call in sick. Wednesday, that day was scheduled off of the class to begin with, I guess because the teacher had something else to do. So this week I didn't do much writing, unfortunately. I also didn't do much of my reading homework, which I should have been, which is kind of unfortunate. But before I continue on with that rant, let's look at the Wikipedia front page article. Today's featured article is British National, the Overseas, a class of British nationality that was granted by voluntary registration to the British Dependent Territory citizens who were Hong Kong residents prior to the transfer of sovereignty to China on July 1st, 1997. Individuals of this nationality are British nationals and Commonwealth citizens, but not British citizens. They are subject to immigration controls when entering the United Kingdom and do not have the automatic right of abode there or in Hong Kong, but all would have permanent residence status in Hong Kong when they acquired this status. This nationality gives its holders favor status when resident in the United Kingdom and confers eligibility to vote, obtain citizenship under a simplified process, and serve in public office or reserved government positions. About 169,000 individuals currently hold active British passports with this status and may request consular protection when traveling abroad, except in Hong Kong, mainland China, and Macau, for whatever that's worth. In the news recently, the Italian cities of Milan and Cortina d'Ampezzo are chosen as the joint hosts of the 2026 Winter Olympics and Winter Paralympics. In the Amhara region of Ethiopia, Regional President Ambachew Mekonnen and National Military Chief of Staff Saer Mekonnen are assassinated. Wow. At least 184 people have died during a heat wave in India. Former President of Egypt Mohamed Morsi died during his trial at the age of 67. On the day of June 1st in history, excuse me, July 1st. July 1st is Canada Day. It is also Republic Day in Ghana and Independence Day in Rwanda. Um, on July 1st in history, 1520, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, conquistadors led by Herman Cortes were nearly annihilated in the Aztec capital and barely escaped by night. In 1867, as per the British North America Act, the province of Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia joined in a confederation to create the modern nation of Canada. In 1935, the first Grant Park Musical Festival, the United States' only annual free outdoor classical music concert series, was held in Chicago's Grant Park. In 1979, Sony introduced the Walkman portable audio player, changing music listening habits by allowing people to listen to their own choice of music on the move. In 1999, legislative governance of Scotland was transferred from the Scottish office in Westminster to the Scottish Parliament. As far as trivia goes, poutine and back bacon on a bun were served while the beaver was awarded to Made in Canada at the inaugural Canadian Comedy Awards. I don't understand that sentence, but okay. Let's see, anything else that's remotely interesting? The WWE 24/7 Championship, a professional wrestling championship, can be defended anytime, anywhere, as long as a WWE referee is present. Interesting. Hmm. Featured list of today is Edgar Allan Poe. I wonder if the date has anything to do with the guy. No, it doesn't look like it, at least not that I can tell. It's not his birthday or his death day. Anyway, so as I was talking, normally I have each week a little bit of material for my classes. Unfortunately, I haven't been doing much of my writing because we haven't had a writing assignment due. I also haven't been doing much reading because I'm very lazy and have had kind of a lot on my mind and been going through a lot of things and just been getting kind of lazy myself. However, tonight I think we will try reading uh, some of the reading which I have been assigned. I was going to go on a little rant and I stopped myself, and now I'm going to talk about it. Um, so there was something that was kind of interesting about my class. It's an intro to imaginative writing course. We talk about imaginative writing, obviously, which includes, fiction and general creative writing, which doesn't necessarily get published, but also poetry and the likes. But something that was kind of interesting is that because it's a very lax class, early on, in either the first day or maybe the first week, the teacher handed out, I guess she'd be the professor. I think she might even have a doctorate. Um, so I should probably respect her. But she passed out a paper that had a whole list of categories that we could potentially go through. And we were to put down, 1 through 5, the ones we were interested in. Number 1 being the most interested, and 5 being the least, but still interested, obviously. More so than any of the other categories. I don't remember all of them. A lot of them were things I'd never heard of. A lot of them were stuff I was really interested in because I was curious about them and I didn't know anything about them. So I actually ended up putting down like 9 options because I didn't think that would count, but that was what I was trying. Shelby's asking me in the chat where Tyler is. He is apparently away. He was on earlier. Um, I think he's been working kind of long shifts, so I don't know if he has to get up early. Probably does given the summer weather, but yeah, he's not. It doesn't seem like he's currently online, but that's okay. Um, so anyways, so there were a lot of categories. Some of them had to deal with genre fiction, so she was giving us the option to learn more about science fiction and fantasy, or westerns, which I thought was interesting that she singled that out. Like there wasn't an option for romance books, I don't think, but there was one for westerns, which was really interesting to me. There was also stuff that was more about like indie publishing, which really caught my attention. I didn't figure that you would learn that, especially not in what is technically a writing class. But there was something that she had mentioned that it was something about like binding your own books, I think. Well, ladies, you can go ahead and sleep if you want. This channel is meant to be a sleepy channel. On that note, I've been in talk with some. I say talks, make it sound really official. I've been talking to kind of someone who's a musician, a very talented pianist, wondering if they would be willing to play a little musical piece and just record it. The actual sheet music is already public domain that I wanted, so I just needed, my own performance more or less so that I wouldn't be stealing someone else's. I'd kind of talked to him about it. He's very willing to do it, but he is also very busy and kind of forgetful, which I can understand because I'm the same way. Um, but anyways, that's a very sleepy piece of music. If hopefully he doesn't forget. I don't want to push him because he's willing to do this for free, even though I'm willing to pay him a little bit. Um, so, but if that does come to pass and he doesn't forget about it, um, that will probably be the more permanent piece of music, and that one's really gonna go with that whole aesthetic of sleepy kind of go to sleep music because that's what this stream is for. It's bedtime stories, trying to put people to sleep. But anyways, so the professor, she offered the chance to um, learn about like binding our own books, which is, that's like kind of awesome. And I don't know, like obviously I can't imagine it's just like a 3 ring binder. It's got to be more intensive than that to warrant a whole class or a lecture or whatever. So that was like number one on my priority because I thought that'd be so cool to just like write a fantasy story and then like put it in it like an actual like handmade book. But unfortunately, because I'm one of only 2 English majors in the class. What everybody else wanted was to learn about fairy tales, which was an option, and then like genre fiction. So there's a little bit of like science fiction, and that was part of the reason why I kind of fell off with the reading for this week, because there was there's like a list of like how to write science fiction. I don't care. Like whenever somebody like kind of offers advice to write genre fiction, I tend to tune it out because it's usually like 9 times out of 10 it's stuff that I've heard before or that I already know or that I just don't care because I don't even like science fiction as even as a writer. Um, and then on top of that, there was the reading after that. uh, which is not actually genre fiction like fantasy or anything like that. It's just flash fiction short stories. And I read one that was the perspective of this woman who's dating, um, and like kind of her mental state. And it wasn't explicit. It wasn't like, oh, I'm so weary of dating. It was more like implied, because artists have to be implicative instead of forthright. Um, but I read it, and that was the only one of that reading assignment that I read out of like 4 articles because it was just so depressing that it like took the wind out of my sails for like the rest of the day. I did end up writing like a short story in response to like kind of what's the phrase I'm looking for? To kind of blow off some steam, I guess. I can't believe the words are failing me. But essentially, as an emotional response to it, like I ended up writing a short story, uh, something that's very cathartic. That's the phrase I'm looking for. I don't know if I'm going to share that, but at least not on stream, because it's pretty good, I think. Good enough to keep and save and keep quiet, you know? Anyways. But normally we do read fairy tales. And this week, probably not going to be an exception. However, part of the reading for this week, even though, like I read fairy tales on the regularly, so I don't need, to pay all this money to go to class and then just be like, oh, by the way, read this public domain fairy tale. And by the way, it's got social implications. So you better, catch up on that. Um, Thankfully, it's more than that because she gave us not just she gave us 3 fairy tales, but she also gave us pairings with those. Sort of I guess a reinterpretation or a retelling of the same fairy tale. Because naturally, with anything that stays popular, people are going to insist that it aligns with their political views and that it's propaganda for their political beliefs and that it's a socioeconomic, horse wallop. On that note, I actually found out because I'm an English major, it's specifically English. I found out there's actually a degree specifically for writing, like creative writing. So instead of, a bachelor's in English, I could get a bachelor's in writing. And I was like, oh, that, as an editor for like writers, that would actually be really cool. Because then people go, oh, this guy, he went to school for this and not just English in general. Um, but I looked into it, and the reason I hesitated, and I don't think I'm going to change my major to that, is the fact that the actual like degree for that is almost like a sociology degree. Like it's about social activism. I don't care about social activism, at least not on a conscious level. I don't like I don't want to write to prove a point to society. I don't want to like, be like, "Oh, there's children starving in Africa. Here's a story about, little elf boys and they're starving and crying and begging the reader to feed them or something like that." Because I don't I hate that. I hate it when writers do that, and I hate when there's an agenda, and I hate when it's allegorical. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. And that's why I love fantasy so much, is that it's not so direct, is that it is interpretive and it's subjective, and you can, have it be one way or the other. And so looking at the requirements for that degree and seeing that, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do that because that might require me to do something that's actually useful instead of just being a fancy pants artist. Um, but anyways, uh, that might change in the future if my perception changes or whatever. For right now, though, still an English major, still going to be jobless once I get out of school. But I digress. So we have 3 fairy tales, and they're all good ones, and they all have pairings with them. I'm tempted to do all 3 stories and then do the pairings with them. Because naturally, we can't just have a story about, about a guy that kills his wives and you know puts them away. We also have to have it be an allegory for the danger women face in their day-to-day lives. Because if we're not doing something serious, then it's just not even worth doing. I just pulled a thread out of my pillow. I probably shouldn't have done that. I ruined everything. My only hesitation with this is that we have already read Snow White. We read that on the stream last week, as I mentioned. And I'm wondering if I need to reread it or just go straight into the other one. And for that matter, I'm wondering because the pairing to that is actually Neil Gaiman. who's a writer that you might actually have heard of before, and I'm wondering if that's going to get me in copyright trouble. The other ones, nobody knows them. Probably nobody's going to watch this stream anyway, but I kind of hesitate. So I don't know what you guys think, ladies. If you want me to just go ahead and reread Snow White and then do the Neil Gaiman story. Um, and then, if it gets my copyright strike, I can just blame it all on you. Or if I could just skip the Snow White one and go on to the other two stories, which are fairy tales we have not read, at least recently. Let's see, actually reading about it. Okay, so the Neil Gaiman story, it's based on Snow White. It's called Snow, Glass, and Apples. It appears as a benefit book published by Dreamhaven for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. Proceeds from this book go to CBLDF, which is that thing, and it is a non-profit charitable tax-exempt protects First Amendment rights for comic books creators, retailers, artists, publishers whose work has been censored. This story is posted to the website by permission. Please do not duplicate, copy, distribute this story without. So I'm gonna guess that's probably a no. All right, we're gonna skip the Neil Gaiman story and also Mrs. Tiddlywinks. Um, just go to sleep. I'm also just gonna take this time to say that I don't really like Neil Gaiman as much as I used to. I tried to read American Gods and I got like halfway through it and I just gave up. It was awful. There was like little bits of stuff that interested me, but the rest of it, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. It was so dull. And it's funny because like Neil Gaiman is kind of responsible for he's kind of responsible for my what is he responsible for? That book that I've been writing for years. It was initially based on or inspired by one of Neil Gaiman's stories. And I really liked him when I was a teenager. I really liked The Sandman. Never finished it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I just couldn't get a hold of the later copies, or all of them, I should say. Um, and I don't know, like, because I tried to finish Sandman. It's even that, like, I kind of dropped off of it, even though that's a comic book. But anyways, let's take a look here. I'm going to consider this for educational purposes. We're not going to read Neil Gaiman, because he's a big enough name that I don't want to mess with that. And also, times have changed, I guess. I think we will try the Juniper Tree. Oh, no. Now, I've mentioned this on the stream before. I'm going to mention it again. I try to use YouTube's built-in features to make independent videos of the fairy tales. That way you can listen to them without listening to the whole stream. The problem is that the cutoff for it is really, really bad. And like if so you need like time to compensate, which is just nothing but silence. I've got kind of a new method. Um, that I think might work. Hopefully. We're gonna try it tonight. if I can find a half decent picture to use for YouTube. There is the Wikipedia one, but it looks kind of messy. That one's from 2007. Don't want to do that. That one's from the DeviantArts. Kimberly's saying if I record Mrs. Tiddlywinks, she won't ask for it again. I'll probably record it at some point, but this is the agenda for right now. I have read actually the Juniper Tree before. I think it was actually the first fairy tale I read on the stream, probably even before I was on YouTube. I can't even remember, but and I read that one first because it was actually like the first grim fairy tale that I read in a book. I talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. Years and years ago, when I was a teenager, I would go to the library and check out the comic books because there were a lot that were really cool, and I discovered a lot that I really liked. Um, and there was this comic book, a big like tome of a comic book, not just like one of those little ones, but like an actual like like a thick fat uh, comic book tome. It was an anthology of the Grimm fairy tales, and they were all illustrated by different artists, and it was great art. I've been trying to look for it to see if I can find it again for old time's sake. Um, Unfortunately, there's been like this other comic book series, which is just like uh, it's like Grimm fairy tale comics, but it's like really, really terrible. It's just like this cheesecake, like lowbrow, just this trash, basically. Nothing at all what I've been looking for, unfortunately. But the very first story in that, I'll never forget, was the Juniper Tree. And it's a pretty dark story. It's one of the darker ones. It borderlines on horror. In fact, it kind of does resemble Friday the 13th a little bit. Um, excuse me. Like I said, if you want to sleep, I won't hold it against you. People need their sleep, especially when they've been traveling across the country. So, go to sleep. And dream of large women. Why is it so hard to find a good picture of a juniper tree? I'm going to steal this one. And hope that it's old enough that it's not a problem. Anyway, so that was the reason why it was like the first fairy tale I read on here. Yeah, it's pretty good. The juniper tree. We don't want people to think that we're lowbrow here. Now, I had mentioned that I think I'm going to try and change the method. of how I do recordings, because there's a lapse in time. Oh, what the heck? I can't even do it. Well, that's lame. The option just won't even let me. That's lame. Well, in any case, maybe that's alright. Maybe YouTube realized that it kind of sucks and now they're going to try and do something about it. Or maybe they only allow you to do it so many times, which is even more lame. But that's okay. We're going to try this. So, because there's a delay, it's hard for me to tell exactly like how far the delay is. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to change the card and then change it back. Well, I guess there's no point now that I can't create highlights. Okay, never mind. My clever plan has gone out the window. And I'm not even gonna worry about cutoff. I'm just gonna start reading. And I'm gonna read it right from my homework source. The Juniper Tree. Jeez, off to a great start. Okay. The Juniper Tree by the Brothers Grimm. Long ago, at least 2,000 years, there was a rich man who had a beautiful and pious wife, and they loved each other dearly. However, they had no children, though they wished very much to have some. And the woman prayed for them day and night, but they didn't get any, and they didn't get any. In front of their house there was a courtyard where there stood a juniper tree. One day in winter the woman was standing beneath it, peeling herself an apple. And while she was thus peeling the apple, she cut her finger, and the blood fell into the snow. "Oh," said the woman. She sighed heavily, looked at the blood before her, and was most unhappy. "If only I had a child as red as blood and as white as snow." And as she said that, she became quite contented, and felt sure that it was going to happen. Then she went into the house, and a month went by, and the snow was gone, and 2 months, and everything was green, and 3 months, and all the flowers came out of the earth, and 4 months, and all the trees in the woods grew thicker, and the green branches were all entwined in one another. And the birds sang until the woods resounded, and the blossoms fell from the trees. Then the 5th month passed. She stood beneath the juniper tree, which swelled so sweet that her heart jumped for joy. Which smelled so sweet that her heart jumped for joy, and she fell on her knees and was beside herself. And when the 6th month was over, the fruit was thick and large, and she was quite still. And after the 7th month she picked the juniper berries and ate them greedily. Then she grew sick and sorrowful. Then the 8th month passed, and she called her husband to her and cried, "If I die, then bury me beneath the juniper tree." Then she was quite comforted and happy until the next month was over, and then she had a child as white as snow and as red as blood, and when she saw it she was so happy that she died. Her husband buried her beneath the juniper tree, and he began to cry bitterly. After some time he was more at ease, and although he still cried, he could bear it. And some time later he took another wife. He had a daughter by the second wife, but the first wife's child was a little son, and he was as red as blood and as white as snow. When the woman looked at her daughter, she loved her very much, but then she looked at the little boy, and it pierced her heart, for she thought he would always stand in their way, and she was always thinking how she could get the entire inheritance for her daughter. And the evil one filled her mind with this until she grew very angry, until she grew very angry with the little boy, and she pushed him from one corner to the other, and slapped him here and there, and cuffed him there, until the poor child was always afraid, for when he came home from school there was nowhere he could find any peace. One day the woman had gone upstairs to her room, when her little daughter came up too, and said, "Mother, give me an apple." "Yes, my child," said the woman, and gave her a beautiful apple out of the chest. The chest had a large heavy lid, with a sharp iron lock. "Mother," said the little daughter, "is brother not to have one too?" This made the woman angry, but she said, "Yes, when he comes home from school." When from the window she saw him coming, it was as though the evil one came over her, and she grabbed the apple and took it away from her daughter, saying, "You shall not have one before your brother." She threw the apple into the chest and shut it. Then the little boy came in the door, and the evil one made her say to him kindly, "My son, do you want an apple?" And she looked at him fiercely. "Mother," said the little boy, "how angry you look." "Yes, give me an apple." Then it seemed to her as if she had to persuade him. "Come with me," she said, opening the lid of the chest. "Take out an apple for yourself." And while the little boy was leaning over, the evil one prompted her, and crash! She slammed down the lid, and his head flew off, falling among the red apples. Then fear overcame her, and she thought, "Maybe I can get out of this." So she went upstairs to her room, to her chest full of drawers, and took out a white scarf out of the top drawer, and set the head on the neck again, tying the scarf around it so that nothing could be seen. Then she set him on a chair in front of the door and put the apple in his hand. After this, Marlene came into the kitchen to her mother, who was standing by the fire with a pot of hot water before her, which she was stirring around and around. "Mother," said Marlene, "brother is sitting at the door, and he looks totally white, and has an apple in his hand. I asked him to give me the apple, but he did not answer me, and I was very frightened." "Go back to him," said the mother, "and if he will not answer you, then box his ears." So Marlene went to him and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But he was silent. So she gave him one on the ear, and his head fell off. Marlene was terrified and began crying, screaming, and ran to her mother and said, "Oh, mother, I have knocked my brother's head off." And she cried and could not be comforted. "Marlene," said the mother, "what have you done? Be quiet and don't let anyone know about it. It cannot be helped now. We will cook him into stew." Then the mother took the little boy and chopped him in pieces, put him into the pot, and cooked him into stew. But Marlene stood by crying, and all her tears fell into the pot. They did not need any salt. Stupid. Then the father came home and sat down at the table and said, "Where is my son?" And the mother served up a large, large dish of stew, and Marlene cried and could not stop. Then the father said again, "Where is my son?" "Oh," the mother said, "he has gone across the country to his mother's great uncle. He will stay there a while." "What is he doing there? He did not even say goodbye to me." "Oh, he wanted to go, and asked if he could stay 6 weeks. He will be well taken care of there." "Oh," said the man, "I am unhappy. It isn't right. He should have said goodbye to me." With that he began to eat, saying, "Marlene, why are you crying? Your brother will certainly come back." Then he said, "Wife, this food is delicious. Give me some more." And the more he ate, the more he wanted. And he said, "Give me some more. You two shall have none of it. It seems to me as if it were all mine." And he ate and ate, throwing all the bones under the table until he had finished it all. Marlene went to her chest of drawers, took her best silk scarf from the bottom drawer, and gathered all the bones from beneath the table, and tied them up in her silk scarf, then carried them outside the door, crying tears of blood. She laid them down beneath the juniper tree on the green grass, and after she had put them there, she suddenly felt better and did not cry any more. Then the juniper tree began to move. The branches moved apart, then moved together again, just as if someone were rejoicing and clapping his hands. At the same time, a mist seemed to rise from the tree, and in the center of this mist it burned like a fire, and a beautiful bird flew out of the fire singing magnificently, and it flew high into the air, and when it was gone, the juniper tree was just as it had been before, and the cloth with the bones was no longer there. Marlene, however, was as happy and contented as if her brother was still alive, and she went merrily into the house, sat down at the table, and ate. Then the bird flew away and lit on a goldsmith's house and began to sing. My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister Marlene gathered all my bones, tied them to a silken scarf, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I. The goldsmith was sitting in his workshop, making a golden chain, when he heard the bird sitting on his roof and singing. The song seemed very beautiful to him. He stood up, but as he crossed the threshold he lost one of his slippers. However, he went right up the middle of the street with only one slipper and one sock on. He had his leather apron on, and in one hand he had a golden chain, and in the other his tongs. The sun was shining brightly on the street. He walked onward, then stood still and said to the bird, "Bird, how beautifully you can sing. Sing that piece for me again." "No," said the bird, "I do not sing twice for nothing. Give me the gold chain, and then I will sing it again for you." The goldsmith said, "Here is the golden chain for you. Now sing that song again for me." Then the bird came and took the golden chain in its right claw, and went on and sat in front of the goldsmith and sang, My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister Marlene gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken scarf, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I. Then the bird flew away to a shoemaker, lit on his roof, and sang again. Hearing this, the shoemaker ran out of the door in his shirt sleeves and looked up at his roof, and had to hold his hand in front of his eyes to keep the sun from blinding him. Bird, he said, how beautifully you can sing. Then he called in at the door, Wife, come outside. There is a bird out here. Look at this bird. He certainly can sing. Then he called his daughter and her children, and the journeyman, and the apprentice, and the maid, and they all came out into the street, and looked at the bird, and saw how beautiful he was. What fine red and green feathers he had, and how his neck was like pure gold, and how his eyes shone like stars in his head. Bird, said the shoemaker, sing that song for me again. No, said the bird, I do not sing twice for nothing. You must give me something. Wife, the man said, go into the shop. There is a pair of red shoes on the top shelf. Bring them down. The wife did as she was bade. There, bird, now sing the piece for me again. And the bird came and took the shoes in his left claw, and flew back and sang again. When he finished his song, he flew away. In his right claw he had the chain, in his left the shoes. He flew far away to a mill, and the mill went clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. In the mill sat 20 millers' apprentices, cutting a stone, and chiseling, chip-chop, chip-chop, chip-chop. The bird sat on a linden tree which stood in front of the mill, and sang, My mother, she killed me. One of them stopped working. My father, he ate me. 2 stopped working, and listened. My sister Marlene, 4 more stopped, gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken scarf. Only 8 were now chiseling, laid them beneath, now only 5, the juniper tree, now only 1. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I. Then the last one stopped also and heard the last words. Bird, he said, how beautifully you sing. Let me hear that too. Sing it once more for me. No, said the bird, I do not sing twice for nothing. Give me the millstone, and then I will sing it again. Yes, he said, if it belonged only to me, you should have it. Yes, said the others, if he sings again, he can have it. Then the bird came down, and the 20 millers took a beam and lifted the stone up. Yo heave ho, yo heave ho, yo heave ho. The bird stuck his neck through the hole and put the stone on as if it were a collar, then flew to the tree and sang again. When he was finished singing, he spread his wings. In his right claw he had the chain, in his left the shoe, and around his neck the millstone. He flew far away, back again to his father's house. In the room, the father, the mother, and Marlene were sitting at the table. The father said, I feel so contented. I am so happy. Not I, said the mother. I feel uneasy, just as if a bad storm were coming. Marlene just sat and cried and cried. Then the bird flew up and seated itself on the roof, and the father said, Oh, I feel so truly happy, and the sun is shining so beautifully outside. I feel as if I were about to see some old acquaintance again. Not I, said the woman. I am so afraid that my teeth are chattering, and I feel that I have fire in my veins. As she tore open her bodice even more, Marlene sat in a corner crying. She held a handkerchief before her eyes and cried until it was wet clear through. Then the bird seated itself on the juniper tree and sang, My mother, she killed me. The mother stopped her ears and shut her eyes, not wanting to see or hear, but there was a roaring in her ears like the fiercest storm, and her eyes burned and flashed like lightning. My father, he ate me. Oh, mother, said the man, that is a beautiful bird. He is singing so splendidly, and the sun is shining so warmly. It smells like pure cinnamon. My sister Marlene. Then Marlene laid her head on her knees and cried, but the man said, I am going out. I must see the bird up close. Oh, don't go, said the woman. I feel as though the whole house were shaking and on fire. But the man went out and looked at the bird, gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken scarf, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I. With this, the bird dropped the golden chain, and it fell right around the man's neck, so exactly around that it fit beautifully. Then the man went in and just said, Just look what a beautiful bird that is, and what a beautiful golden chain he has given me, and how nice it looks. But the woman was terrified. She fell down on the floor in the room, and her cap fell off. And then the bird sang once more. I wish I were 1,000 fathoms beneath the earth, so I would not have to hear it, the mother said. Then the woman fell down as if she were dead. "Oh," said Marlene, "I too will go out and see if the bird will give me something." Then she went out. The bird threw the shoes down to her. Then she was contented and happy. She put on the new red shoes and danced and leapt into the house. "Oh," she said, "I was so sad when I went out, and now I am so contented. That is a splendid bird. He has given me a pair of red shoes." "No," said the woman, jumping to her feet, with her hair standing up like flames of fire. "I feel as though the world were coming to an end. I too will go out and see if it makes me feel better." And as she went out of the door, crash! The bird flew threw the millstone on her head and crushed her to death. And the father and Marlene went out and heard after they heard it. Smoke and flames and fire were rising from the place. And when that was over, the little brother was standing there, and he took his father and Marlene by the hand, and all three were very happy. And they went down and they went into the house, sat down at the table, and ate. What a nice little tale for children's. Now, as I mentioned, there's a pairing for this one. It's a bit longer, I think. It should be a little easier to read. But yes, that is the Juniper Tree. It's kind of grim, no pun intended. Quite grisly. This is a bit personal, but so obviously there is some intended moral here. And I know I just got done with a spiel about how I don't like imposing morals and propaganda and all that in stories. Um, but I will take a moment to say this about the Juniper Tree, is that the stepmother, she kind of feels this burden of guilt, and to be honest, like I felt that in my life, where just like it feels like the world's gonna end because of guilt. Um, and the only way, like I got so used to it that I just kind of thought I was gonna be anxious for the rest of my life. And when I finally, what's the phrase I'm looking for? When I confess, I guess, repent. When I did that, certainly, and still when I do that, I no longer feel nearly as anxious or afraid. In this day and age, I think, honestly, like speaking on a personal basis, that a lot of anxiety people feel is the result of their unresolved guilt. As people like they try to convince themselves that there's no such thing as a sin. I don't believe that. I believe that even if society considers what you've done acceptable, there will be a pang of consciousness in your guilt, a pang of guilt in your consciousness, and if you don't take care of that, it will destroy you. Um, Tonight on a very special episode of Reading Grounds. So this is apparently a retelling of that story by Alissa Nutting. Yes, that really is her last name. I'm not even going to make a comment about it. We're going to compare and contrast this. If it gets, hopefully I don't get like a copyright strike or something. Hopefully this isn't illegal. If it is, I'm going to have to repent or my guilt will crush me like a millstone. Um, if the, I haven't read this yet, even though I should. It's my homework. Um, if this is if this ends up getting like too grisly, like beyond just violence, if it gets into like incest territory, I'm gonna cut it short. Hopefully not. But the stupid thing is that like, especially with like these really edgy, gory fairy tales, like the tendency is to always push them to their limits. Like I had mentioned, those other comic books, they're just like complete trash. Uh, just cheesecake and uh, just basically completely mindless and not very interesting. And obviously, we don't want that. I feel like, though, a lot of times people will use darkness and grittiness in an attempt to try and seem mature when really their story doesn't have much substance. That's very common with a lot of amateur authors I know, or aspiring writers, I should say, who write like fan fiction, and it's especially common with children who are kind of going through a rebellious phase, teenagers. They'll just write this really dark story thinking that it'll be good, and it's not. Um, it's a very like, and I'm saying this as somebody that likes dark stuff. It's a very fine line to walk. Uh, so hopefully Miss Nutting, if that is her real name, and if she is indeed a miss, hopefully she is able to be on the right side of that line. But anyways, without further ado, this is Alissa Nutting's The Brother and the Bird. Marlene's mother cleaned constantly, bleary-eyed and multiple hairnets, on her vigilant search for the impure. As she walked, she so often rolled an antiquated upright vacuum alongside her that it grew to seem like an exterior organ, an intravenous device that performed dialysis or another life-saving function. Marlene had no memory of Mother's bare hands, for they were always beneath thick, yellow kitchen gloves, and had begun as the years passed to seem prosthetic. Fearful that dust might see her coming and scatter, Mother crept from one chore to another, hunched over, skulking about the tips of her toes and raising each knee skyward with every step. What horrible shadows this cast upon the wall! Young Marlene would often shiver in bed and watch a ghastly outline bend steadily larger as Mother advanced down the hallway, the rubber gloves taking on the shape of oversized claws. Marlene's fright and anticipation usually became so intense that she let out an audible gasp when Mother finally appeared in front of her bedroom door. Mother would stop, sniff. "Good girls are asleep by now," she'd whisper, quiet enough to make Marlene wonder whether Mother meant for this to be heard. Father was friendlier, bear-like and aloof. When Marlene and Brother were little, they had delighted in running their fingers through the thick black curls on Father's chest and back, and riding him like an animal. He'd obligingly take to all fours and crawl around the yard, giving in to their wishes for a spirit of manufactured danger. "I'm going to eat you," he'd eventually growl, and their cheeks would glow pink as pigs. But Father had always stopped their play if they got too close to the juniper tree, their yard's curious landmark. Halfway up, its trunk divided into two distinct sections that grew away from each other towards separate futures. Being children, Marlene and her brother always tested the limit. What was the closest they could get to the tree before Father excused himself and cited fatigue or claimed to be growing old? "It's the cremated human it's the cremated human remains," Brother explained. He referred to his birth mother, Father's deceased first wife, whose urn was buried in the yard under the tree. Marlene had occasionally spied Mother watering its roots with bleach and kicking the tree, stomping atop the first wife's grave in a peculiar dance. And sometimes Mother picked up the large axe in the basement and spoke kindly to it, as though it were a baby, cradling it in her gloved hands and staring back at her reflection in the blade's clean mirror. But Mother hated her husband's son even more than she did the tree. She beat him often and cleverly, across the body but never the face, with her heavy Bible and household objects made of wood. "I will clean the sin right out of you," Mother remarked, sweating. "You are not of my loins, you wicked thing." Oh, that voice is harsh. Her own fictive brand of religion had curious rules. She'd stopped attending Mass long ago, remarking that the purification of one's household was tantamount to prayer. Marlene wished for a life away from Mother, where she and Brother had all the home to themselves. and father could float in and out as he pleased, a furry satellite. As the years passed, Marlene fell deeply in love with brother. By the time she was 12 and he 16, simply thinking about him made her feel as full and sleepy as eating a large meal. Marlene often snuck into brother's room after mother was asleep, and they would lie on his bed and listen to records. During each song, he'd pick out a single line to sing, and Marlene liked to predict which one he was going to choose. When she was right, she felt very good at loving. She'd watch brother's mouth and could almost see his voice spinning into the air like invisible string. Bird, moon, fly away soon. To keep track of time, she thought of the record as an hourglass and the needle as sand. And when she heard its empty scratch, she'd rise gently from the bed, take up the needle, and sneak quietly back to her room. But one night, Marlene and brother drifted off to sleep. They woke to mother standing over top of them with her large Bible. A broken blood vessel had stained the white of her left eye a deep red. Brother sleepily lifted his neck. Mother, he startled, you look very angry. A dirty thing, mother insisted, pointing at the two of them with a shaking rubber finger. The spongy pink curlers beneath her hairnet looked almost like an inflated brain. Marlene tried to curl her body against brother's, but she was quickly flung from the bed as mother's Bible thrashed down upon brother. This beating went on longer than Marlene thought possible, and just when mother seemed to be done, a new wave of fury overtook her like a spell. She lifted her great weight upon brother's chest, placed a pillow atop his face, and pushed the heavy Bible down atop of it. A dirty, dirty thing, she hissed. Brother's feet kicked in high convulsions that lifted the sheets, but mother did not dismount until his legs went still. Then she eased up and turned her smile toward the window and the sun. Remove your socks, mother said. Mother herself was naked, wearing nothing but an apron. She ordered Marlene to fully undress, and fitted her new daughter into a smock and a matching pair of yellow kitchen gloves. Marlene sobbed. Mother was gazing upon brother's corpse with grateful eyes, as though he were a gift basket of fruit. Grab his feet, mother directed. Together they hauled his body down into the basement. Marlene's stomach lurched when they neared the furnace, but mother led them on further, over to the laundry sink in the basement's left corner. As Marlene held open the garbage bag, her hands began to shake. Hail Mary, mother started. A rosary dangled from the axe's handle like a beaded tail. The blade hit into the corpse with a great thwack, and Marlene saw mother's flat buttocks clenched tightly. The image placed Marlene into a catatonic state. She stopped blinking, and errant blood began to dot the white of her eyes. They divided brother's pieces into 12 bags of different shapes and sizes. They scattered them throughout the basement's deep freeze. Mother told Marlene to go take a long shower, and as Marlene climbed the stairs, she spied a piece of brother's flesh still lying beside the sink. Twice she stopped and stared, thinking that she'd seen him move. She cried each time she realized she was mistaken. Father came home to a large sauerbraten flavored with dried juniper berries and a sauce crisped with ginger snap and honey cake crumbs. He ate heartily, large tufts of hair spilling from his collar and shirt cuffs, their ends curling up from the dinner's steam. It wasn't until his plate was almost empty that he asked where brother had gone to. Marlene's eyes moved to the Bible sitting in the living room. Mother had hidden its bloodstains beneath a quilted cover that bore an applique of a stitched cat face. The feline's whiskers were long strokes of thread, lace bordering its edge. Due to its size, the Bible now resembled a pillow. He's visiting friend for a bit, Mother said, smiling. Her grin was fixed and still. She looked like a wicked doll that should never have come to life. Did he say when he'd be back? Father asked. Marlene began to weep as Mother shook her head and adjusted her hairnet. Her yellow-gloved hand moved a spoonful of gravy very slowly toward her husband's mouth, teasing. The weeks that followed were a parade of heavy soups, sweetbreads, and full stews. Disgusted, Marlene resolved to rescue what was left of her brother's remains at any cost. Only 9 bags were left in the freezer. One of these had been torn open, and when she peeked inside, she saw butcher-like excisions on a shank of brother's torso. I'll bury you with your mother under the tree, Marlene promised, and no more of you will ever be eaten. It took Marlene several trips to get all the bags outside. She could carry only a few at a time. On each return to the basement, she carefully checked to see if Mother was hiding beneath the stairs, if the axe was still hanging on the wall. Marlene dropped to her knees beneath the tree and opened the bags, reaching her arm inside to search their contents for Brother's head. He looked quite different now. His cheeks and mouth had been pushed up against the freezer's wall, and had frozen at an upward angle. Brother's ice flesh was as white blonde as his hair. and its heavy cold burned at her skin. When Marlene kissed him, her wet lips stuck painfully to his. She tasted a bit of blood after she pulled herself free. For what seemed like hours, Marlene dutifully struggled with the hard earth and the shovel. She feared that when the sun came up, the hole would still be no bigger than a shoebox, and she'd have no place to hide her brother's thawed parts. When the fluttering sound began, she dismissed it at first. It was buzzing and eternal, like an insect too close to her ears. Then all the berries flew from the juniper tree at once. Marlene's breath left her lungs as she eyed the now covered ground around her, a blanket of berries inches thick. "I'll be caught for sure!" She panicked, and her panic only grew as the berries began to shake and toss on the ground like roasting coffee beans, then cleared to reveal a soft gray circle in their center. Curious, Marlene reached over the berries and placed her hand onto its surface. "Ash," she gasped, but wouldn't say aloud what she was thinking. "Cremated human remains." The fluttering sound loudened, and the berries began to organize themselves like ants. They surrounded the pile of garbage bags, lifting them onto their backs and rolling them into the ash like an assembly line, the bags sinking down into its powder with the ease of rocks into a lake. When all the bags were gone, the berries formed a single line. They drained down into the ash like marbles. Finally, a bird dived down from the tree and soundlessly followed the last berry into the ash. Marlene was very tempted to jump inside and escape as well, but as she approached the gray surface, she cried out in disappointment. The ground had set like a thick pudding, hardened into soil before her very eyes. The next morning, Marlene awoke to the horrible sensation of being watched. A thin stream of urine began to warm under her bottom. "No one would ever have found him in the basement, frozen and quiet in little pieces," Mother whispered. She was seated on the edge of Marlene's bed, inching closer to her daughter's face. "But where is he now?" The grayish-black pockets beneath her eyes seemed full of tiny dark stones. Her hands gripped Marlene's cheeks, their fingernails digging into Marlene's skin even through the rubber of the gloves. For a moment Mother stared into her eyes, searching, then she gave a full smile and left. Marlene watched the indentation Mother had left on the bed raise up and fill, but she did not move until she heard the faraway wail of the vacuum begin to heave in heavy sucks. In tears, Marlene ran into Brother's room. When she looked at his shirts hanging up in the closet, she felt the same affection for their cloth as for his skin. She buried her face in them, ran to his bed and ruffled his sheets, begged him to appear. Appear! She did notice his guitar was missing. Had Mother cut it up as well? Winter came, and Father seemed to retreat into his woolly skin. He ate nothing. He never pressed for further answers about where Brother was staying, but he often wished aloud for his son's return. After dinner, as Mother and Marlene sat by the fire, it became common for Father to excuse himself and take his pipe outdoors. All the while he would stare at the juniper tree, whose branches were growing new berries despite the cold. Mother peeked out of the curtains and watched his every move. "How I think I'll take an axe to that tree," she'd remark, "so that Father may stay with us by the fire." Whenever she passed a window that looked out upon the tree, Mother made an upside-down cross with her gloved fingers and extended it towards the glass. One night, right before she fell asleep, Marlene rolled over to find a feather on her pillow. The moment she touched it, a deep dream began. At first she saw nothing, and when she was able to see, she realized the eyes were not her own, but the eyes of a bird. She looked through them like two holes of a mask, the bird's long beak jutting up into her line of vision. Underground, in a hollow space made of earth, she and the bird were pecking Brother's parts back together. The beak came down in small strikes that were a form of stitching. Occasionally, it would stop and grab berries from a stockpile, using them to fill in holes where Mother had taken away meat. Pieces of pecked-through garbage bags were scattered everywhere like tissue paper. When finished, the bird cried out until Brother's body started moving. The bird jumped ahead, leading Brother through a tunnel up into the juniper tree. Marlene watched as his trunk cracked open like an egg filled with light. She and the bird flew up while Brother crawled out and the tree closed up behind them. Marlene then saw the sky and the roof of their home, and occasionally caught glimpses of Brother. Naked far below, his flesh white and cloudy like a ridge of ice. Even from the air she could make out the violet gaffs on his arm where berries had patched into his skin. When Brother walked into the house, the bird flew to Brother's bedroom window and waited. Brother appeared in his room minutes later, gaunt and confused. He dressed in the dark, lifted his guitar, and left. The bird flew very high until Brother became a silver blonde dot on the road below. A truck stopped and he entered it. The bird flew for quite a distance to follow him. There was the familiar sound of fluttering, the sound Marlene heard on the night she buried him, and there were long stretches of darkness that told of passing time. When the bird's eyes went black, Marlene heard a flapping noise, like musical paper, as the sound of wings sped up into an echo. Finally, the bird perched above a small tavern. Marlene could hear music and see Brother inside, a blanched shape performing a song on his guitar. She saw flashes of him in many towns, on many stages, and could feel his confusion as he wandered. His memory had been reduced to a vague longing, and this came and went spontaneously, like strange desire. Just before she woke, she saw him standing at a sidewalk storefront, eyeing a pair of red shoes that resembled the ones she wore every day. When Marlene woke again, she was in her room. The feather was floating in the air, just inches above her pillow. Her fingers reached out, but at the slightest touch, it turned to ash in her fingers. The dream caused Marlene to feel weary and flu-like. Even the next night, she was still shaky when she sat down to dinner with Mother and Father. Light organ music played on the radio, and Father was cutting his meal into tinier and tinier pieces. "Couldn't you make the sauerbraten again?" he asked Mother, looking down at his plate with distant eyes. Just then, the music on the radio abruptly stopped. Marlene's hands froze around her fork. A fluttering noise poured through the speaker. After a brief moment of static, a very peculiar song came on. "My mother, she killed me," the voice sang. "My father, he ate me. My sister, she saved my bones. Tweet, tweet." Mother crept over and turned down the radio's knob with her rubber fingers. "Some quiet," she snipped. She then scowled at the radio and began to examine it carefully, as if it might be something more than it seemed. The very next night, Mother did indeed make sauerbraten, but this time it was not to Father's liking. He excused himself to go outside and smoke, and Marlene turned on the radio as Mother made a fire. They sat and listened to an organ's cheery song as flames seared the logs a deep white. Just as Father came back inside the house, the radio song turned to static. This slowly gave way to the sound of wings, then music. "Mother killed her little son. What a beautiful bird am I. Father ate till meat was gone. What a beautiful bird am I. Sister saved my bones. Now I sing and fly." Mother's eyes stared straight forward, wide with terror. "Looking at this fire," she remarked in a flat and breathy voice, "I feel like I am burning up." Marlene awoke the next morning to a loud and constant wailing. Neither Mother nor Father seemed able to hear it. Father went away to work as usual, and Mother spent her day on the patio killing bugs. Marlene desperately searched for the source of the noise, but she couldn't tell where it stopped or started. Was her brother's room? The Juniper Tree? The basement? The sound grew so loud that Marlene began to see small gray dots. Occasionally it seemed as if birds were flying just beyond the corners of her vision. For most of the afternoon, she lay in Brother's room, listening to records and getting sick into a bag. When her parents insisted she come down for dinner that evening, Marlene did not think she'd be able to accept the smell of food. But as she sat down, the deafening static leapt from the inside of her head onto the radio. "My mother forced me to die," Brother's voice rang out inside the kitchen. "My father ate me in a pie." Mother leapt up and started her bony fingers toward the dial. "Some quiet," she said, but Father interrupted. "Some music would be nice tonight." "Perhaps a different tune, then," Mother suggested. But as she flipped the knob, she found that the song was on every station. Only my sister began to cry. Father stood up and squinted his eyes towards the window. "Someone walking towards that house? Towards the house?" Grabbing his pipe, he excused himself from the table to have a better look. Mother slowly backed away from the radio, her eyes fixed upon the fireplace, her hands twisting. "When I look at the fire," she stammered, "I feel as if I'm being burned alive." Her smile grew lopsided. She began to unbutton her dress. "There isn't any fire, Mother." Mother's gloved hands grabbed the radio and threw it into the fire. It split into as many pieces as Brother, but the song kept on playing. Her gloves started ripping at her clothes. She buried her head beneath the faucet of her sink and began to shriek. Panicked, Marlene ran outside to Father, but when she saw the pale figure coming down the path, her heart leaped. "Is it Brother?" she cried aloud. Hopeful, Father began to wave a hairy hand, and Mother burst from the house, topless with soaked hair. Marlene's eyes flew to the axe Mother clutched in one yellow-gloved hand and the large Bible she held in the other. "I'll chop them all down!" Mother screamed, her torn dress blowing off her body. "The tree and our visitor as well!" But as Mother arrived beneath the tree, all its new berries rained down upon her, and she halted in shock. The berries shook and spun upon the ground, and as they cleared a hole around Mother, she and her axe dropped down right through the earth. Father and Marlene ran over just in time to see the white line of Mother's scalp disappear into a thick powder of ash, to see the ash harden back into soil, to see Mother's Bible fall to the ground. Its pages flew open and flooded, then turned into white birds that sailed away. The berries lifted from the ground like a swarm of bees. Their mass moved towards Brother, as if to attack him. They landed everywhere upon his body and face and guitar, until he was fully covered. Then, as if giving him juice to use his blood, the berries deflated and fell from his skin one by one, like dried scabs, flatter than onion skin. Marlene ran to him, breathless. "Look, Father!" she cried. "Brother is pink and new!" But Father loomed quiet beneath the tree. He was bent over, running his fingers along the ground, searching for some trace of either wife below. Okay, so that's actually the end of that retelling of the story. But there is an addendum, I guess you might say, a postscript. It looks like it's by the writer. I'm going to read that as well, just, for the sake of it. As a child, what fascinated me most about Grimm's tale of the Juniper Tree was that the father could not detect that he was eating his son. It seemed that such a bond would somehow be, dare I say, tasteable. Perhaps this is why I was so impressed years later when I discovered Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber, a story where the young woman's life is saved through her mother's devoted attention and sharp instinct. I find the primary modern relevance of Grimm's The Juniper Tree as having a great deal to do not only with the perils of mentally or emotionally absent parents, but also with ignorance in general and the various ways that being uninformed can open a space for danger. Where are the things we buy coming from? Who is making them? How are they making them? What are our tax dollars funding? Which companies control our food? Hyperbolized as it might be, the original version of the Juniper Tree makes a great case for knowing, for being vigilantly present and aware. In my rewriting of the tale, I wanted to retain not only the father's ignorance, but also the original source of hope for the murdered brother, his sister Marlene. Hansel and Gretel, a similar story of child abandonment, movingly describes a brother and sister who rely on each other for survival after their father's wife has convinced them to abandon the children. Most versions of Hansel and Gretel describe the pair returning to live with their father after their stepmother has died in the same way that the Juniper Tree ends, with the trinity of a father and his daughter and his son. I'm not a fan of giving these fathers a second chance, although I accept that the children, in their goodness, would grant it. So I wanted my retelling to emphasize that, although the children would accept their father, his emotional distance has rendered him unnecessary in their lives. The children's devotion to each other is what allows for their ultimate safety, and their happiness is not dependent upon him. Although I altered the lyrics of the song, the plot structure of my story and the original tale of the Juniper Tree both rely on the transcendental and sorcerous power of music. The line, "Bird, moon, fly away soon," is inspired by Bob Dylan's song Jokerman, which is, like so much of Dylan's music, a fairy tale in itself. Okay, now that is The Brother and the Bird. I've been reading for about more than an hour now. When we come back, I will do the other reading, which is Blackbeard, which is even more edgy than than the Juniper Tree. Excuse me. Ugh, gonna give my voice a rest. I will be right back. Don't you go dying on me. And watch out for stepmothers. They're all evil. Okay. As I was thinking about it, one last note on the Juniper Tree. There was a movie from way back when called The Crow, which is this story about this guy who gets murdered, and then him and his fiance, and then he comes back as a spirit of vengeance. It's completely invincible except for like this crow that follows him around. And if you attack the crow, you damage him. And this kind of reminds me. I'm thinking that that movie was almost certainly inspired by the Juniper Tree. All right, we're going to move on to the next story, and it's extra. Again, it's another edgy story, you know, because we like those. We like being edgy. I want people to take me very seriously because I am a child. I need validation. This is a classic one. This is Bluebeard, which is all about why you should avoid people that dye their hair. Oh, interesting. This particular reading of the story actually has its own it has a moral at the end, like it just straight up says moral for this, and then another moral is so that's good. That way, you know, if we're complete idiots, um, you know, we can figure things out. Shelby's asking me what I'm doing for the 4th of July this week. Working. I will be working Thursday and Friday. And then Saturday I've got a family barbecue. But you know, thanks for asking. We might be a little short on time. I don't know how long this. Let me take a look. Holy Moses. Okay. Well, no. I mean, it's still long, but we might not be able to do the addendum, the extra story, unfortunately. We'll just have to see because that is it is 19 pages. Good gravy. Anyways, so this is Bluebeard. Um, we're gonna read about it. It's attributed to Charles Perrault. I believe that's how you pronounce that. I could have sworn it was because this story was also in that collection of fairy tales. I don't know if it actually is a Grimm Brothers story or, you know, what the confusion there is. I don't care enough to find out. We're just going to go ahead and start reading. This is Bluebeard. There was once a man who had fine houses, both in town and country, a deal of silver and gold plate, embroidered furniture, and coaches gilded all over with gold. But this man was so unlucky as to have a blue beard, which made him so frightfully ugly that all the women and girls ran away from him. One of his neighbors, a lady of quality, had two daughters who were perfect beauties. He desired of her one of them in marriage, leaving to her choice which of the two she would bestow on him. Neither of them would have him, and they sent him backwards and forwards from one to the other, not being able to bear the thoughts of marrying a man who had a blue beard. Adding to their disgust and aversion was the fact that he had already been married to several wives, and nobody knew what had become of them. Bluebeard, to engage their affection, took them, and with their mother and 3 or 4 ladies of their acquaintance, with other young people of the neighborhood, to one of his country houses, where they stayed a whole week. The time was filled with parties, hunting, fishing, dancing, mirth, and feasting. Nobody went to bed, but all passed the night in rallying and joking with each other. In short, everything succeeded so well that the youngest daughter began to think that the man's beard was not so very blue at all, and that he was a mighty civil gentleman. As soon as they returned home, the marriage was concluded. About a month afterward, Bluebeard told his wife that he was obliged to take a country journey for 6 weeks at least, about affairs of very great consequence. He desired her to divert herself in his absence, to send for her friends and acquaintances, to take them into the country, if she pleased, and to make good cheer wherever she was. "Here," he said, here are the keys to the 2 great wardrobes, wherein I have my best furniture. These are to my silver and gold plate, which is not every day in use. These open my strong boxes, which hold my money, both gold and silver. These my casket of jewels. And this is the master key to all my apartments. But as for this little one here, it is the key to the closet at the end of the great hall on the ground floor. Open them all, go into each and every one of them, except that little closet which I forbid you, and forbid it in such a manner that, if you happen to open it, you may expect my just anger and resentment." She promised to observe, very exactly, whatever he had ordered. Then he, after having embraced her, got into his coach and proceeded on his journey. Her neighbors and good friends did not wait to be sent for by the newly married lady. They were impatient to see all the rich furniture of her house, and had not dared to come while her husband was there, because of his blue beard, which frightened them. They ran through all the rooms, closets, and wardrobes, which were all so fine and rich that they seemed to surpass one another. After that they went up into the 2 great rooms, which contained the best and richest furniture. They could not sufficiently admire the number and beauty of the tapestries, beds, couches, cabinets, stands, tables, and looking-glasses, in which you might see yourself from head to foot. Some of them were framed with glass, others with silver, plain and gilded, the finest and most magnificent they had ever seen. They ceased not to extol and envy the happiness of their friend, who in the meantime in no way diverted herself in looking upon all these rich things, because the impatience she had to go and open the closet on the ground floor. She was so much pressed by her curiosity that, without considering that it was very uncivil for her to leave the company, she went down a little back staircase, and with such excessive haste that she nearly fell and broke her neck. Having come to the closet door, she made a stop for some time, thinking about her husband's orders, and considering what unhappiness might attend her if she was disobedient. But the temptation was so strong that she could not overcome it. She then took the little key, opened it, trembling. At first she could not see anything plainly, because the windows were shut, and after some moments she began to perceive that the floor was all covered with clotted blood, on which lay the bodies of several dead women ranged against the walls. These were all the wives whom Bluebeard had married and murdered, one after another. She thought she would have died for fear, and the key, which she had pulled out of the lock, fell out of her hand. After having somewhat recovered her surprise, she picked up the key, locked the door, and went upstairs into her chamber to recover, but she could not, for she was so very much frightened. Having observed that the key to the closet was stained with blood, she tried 2 or 3 times to wipe it off, but the blood would not come out. In vain did she wash it, and even rub it with soap and sand. The blood still remained, for the key was magical, and she could never make it quite clean. When the blood was gone off from one side, it came again on the other. Bluebeard returned from his journey the same evening, saying that he had received letters upon the road, informing him that the affair he went about had concluded to his advantage. His wife did all she could to convince him that she was extremely happy about his speedy return. The next morning he asked for the keys, which she gave him, but with such a trembling hand that he easily guessed what had happened. "What!" said he, "is not the key of my closet among the rest?" I must have left it upstairs upon the table." "Fail not. Bring it to me at once." After several goings backwards and forwards, she was forced to bring him the key. Bluebeard, having very attentively considered it, said to his wife, "Why is there blood on the key?" I do not know," cried the poor woman, paler than death. "You do know! I very well know. You went into the closet, didn't you? Very well, madame. You shall go back and take your place among the ladies you saw there." Jeez. I wondered if I was coming down with like a sore throat the other day. Upon this, she threw herself at her husband's feet, and begged his pardon with all the signs of a true repentance, vowing that she would never again be more disobedient. She would have melted a rock, so beautiful and sorrowful was she. But Bluebeard had a heart harder than any rock. "You must die, madam, at once." "Since I must die," looking upon him, she said, with her eyes all bathed in tears, "give me some little time to say my prayers." "I give you half a quarter of an hour, but not one moment more." When she was alone, she called out to her sister and said to her, "Sister Anne, go up, I beg you, to the top of the tower, and look if my brothers are not coming. They promised me they would come today, and if you see them, give them a sign to make haste." Her sister Anne went up to the top of the tower, and the poor afflicted wife cried out from time to time, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anyone coming?" And Sister Anne said, "I see nothing but a cloud of dust in the sun, and the green grass." In the meanwhile, Bluebeard, holding a great saber in his hand, cried out as loud as he could bawl to his wife, "Come down instantly, or I shall come up to you." "One moment longer, if you please," said his wife, and then she cried very softly, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anybody coming?" And Sister Anne answered, "I see nothing but a cloud of dust in the sun, and the green grass." "Come down quickly," cried Bluebeard, "or I will come up to you." "I am coming," answered his wife, and then she cried, "Do you not see anyone coming? I see a great cloud of dust approaching us. Are they my brothers?" "Alas, no, dear sister. I see a flock of sheep." "Will you not come down?" "One moment longer." And then she cried out, "Sister Anne, do you not see anybody coming?" "I see 2 horsemen. Ah, but they are still a great way off." "God be praised," replied the poor wife joyfully. "They are my brothers. I will make them a sign, as well as I can for them to make haste." Then Bluebeard bawled out so loud he made the whole house tremble. The distressed wife came down, threw herself at his feet, all in tears, with her hair about her shoulders. "This means nothing. You must die." Then taking hold of her with her hair in one hand, lifting up the sword with the other, he prepared to strike off her head. The poor lady, turning about to him, and looking at him with dying eyes, desired him to afford her one little moment to recollect herself. "No, no, commend yourself to God." And just as he was ready to strike, at that very instant there was such a loud knocking at the gate that Bluebeard made a sudden stop. The gate was open, and 2 horsemen entered. Drawing their swords, they ran directly to Bluebeard. He knew them to be the wife's brothers, one a dragoon, the other a musketeer, so that he ran away almost immediately to save himself. But the 2 brothers pursued and overtook him before he could get to the steps of the porch. Then they ran their swords through his body and left him dead. The poor wife was almost as dead as her husband, and had not strength enough to rise and welcome her brothers. Bluebeard had no heirs, and so his wife became mistress of all his estate. She made use of one part of it to marry her sister Anne to a young gentleman who had loved her a long while. Another part went to buy captain's commissions for her brothers, and the rest to marry herself to a very worthy gentleman, who made her forget the ill time she had passed with Bluebeard. As I said, there's 2 moral mentions here. Um, First one is curiosity, in spite of its appeal, often leads to deep regret. To the displeasure of many a maiden, its enjoyment is short-lived. Once satisfied, it ceases to exist, and always costs dearly. Another moral: apply logic to this grim story, and you will ascertain that it took place many years ago. No husband of our age would be so terrible as to demand the impossible of his wife, nor would he be such a jealous malcontent. For, whatever the color of her husband's beard, the wife of today will let him know who the master is. I that kind of okay. I just kind of figured it was about abuse, but okay. So that's Bluebeard. I was thinking I would read the companion story, but that's 19 pages. And in fact, it's not like single pages. It's both of them. Oh, dang. Okay. So the thing I'm not going to the thing I'm not going to read, it actually comes from Kimmery's asking what it means if you don't have a beard. Blue pubes, obviously. Blue pubes. I'm going to show the picture of the book's artwork because it's pretty sweet. Not that one. That's the old one. Oh, excuse me. Come on, where are you? Ugh. Ugh. I hope you heard that one. Okay. That is a sweet freaking book cover. It's kind of funny that it's like it starts off and it's like he's discriminated against just because he has a blue beard. That's kind of a stupid reason, obviously. And then he's like this murderous psychopath, obviously. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of silly. And I don't, like I said, uh, I don't like using stories as like propaganda for your own worldview. Obviously, people are going to interpret your works and apply them to their lives or the lives of other people. I don't like doing it directly, but I will say that, uh, there is kind of this interesting trend with fairy tales where, you know, uh, there's a lot of focus on ladies, I think. And it's not necessarily like an inappropriate focus, which happens a lot with fantasy, but it's like, you know, um, Hansel and Gretel and Juniper Tree both had similar themes. Hansel and Gretel, obviously, the little girl saves her brother uh, from the witch, and the evil stepmother dies. Juniper Tree, evil stepmother saved, uh, and then the little girl saves her brother. So there's kind of this dichotomy of like a woman who's innocent is good, obviously, and then a woman who is not innocent is not good and will lead to your death. But it's kind of funny that the proposed moral, which I'm assuming was written by Charles Perrault or whatever his name, um, it's kind of funny that he's like, yeah, don't go snooping around your husband's closets, otherwise you'll die, because apparently your husband is a murderous psychopath, and you're just supposed to be okay with that, because that's what we do. It is kind of interesting because it seems like, at least in more modern times, that it seems like women do appreciate fairy tales more. Perhaps it's just because I don't know. I don't know. I've got some ladies in this stream, I think, last I checked. Maybe you can explain to me why women prefer fairy tales more than men do. I expect at least 10,000 words, double spaced, on my desk by Monday. You have like 3 hours. Go. Don't worry, I'll wait. Just sit here this whole time. And if you hear any strange noises on my end of the mic, don't worry. That's just me passing gas. But mentioning it, actually, in my imaginative writing course, there is a woman who she mentioned, like specifically when we were doing our kind of personal introductions, that she likes fairy tales. And I'm not going to judge someone for that. I'm far from the first person that should be throwing the stone on that. But it is interesting that it seems to be kind of pervasive, especially because there is sort of I guess, a sense of patriarchy to it. Because these were stories written by men, oftentimes on behalf of women. And in fact, as part of this class, there was an article about fairy tales and how they pertain to social sciences. I'm going to link that. I'm not going to read it, but I am going to link it. And it talks about how, like, women kind of... Let me see if I can find exactly what was said. Let's see here. Shelby's saying that it's because fairy tales have a nice ending, and that's what women like, I guess. And that it romanticizes men rather than... I mean, especially Bluebeard, because, I mean, come on. Who doesn't want a Bluebeard all up in your face? Okay, so according to that thing that I just put, that article that I just linked, it claims that fairy tales were intended for educated aristocratic adults, not children, apparently. I find that a little hard to believe. I'm not so sure. Apparently, this one guy is a fairy tale scholar. He says the literary fairy tale was first developed in salons by aristocratic women as a type of parlor game. But that kind of talks about it. Shelby doesn't care for fairy tales, so it's really weird that she's always here. She's some kind of weirdo. It's something that I've kind of noticed that generally readers tend to be women more than men. You're a little bit of a weirdo, Shelby, but that's okay. I'm not judging, just pointing it out for the whole world to see. A lot of, I feel like writing and reading in general is more of a well, I guess a woman's thing, I guess if you want to say that. I'm sure that offends somebody in this day and age. But I guess if I had to speak in terms of stereotypes, it would probably have something to do with men having like jobs, like the man of the house is the breadwinner, so he's out working his full-time job, and the woman maybe has more downtime, more time to read or to kill time. And I'm sure that the moment I'm saying that, at least two people in this room are going to be getting offended at me. So that's how I perceive it. In the way I was applying or implying. Anyways, no, I'm glad to have you here, Shelby. I just gotta give you crap sometimes. And yes, I know it's sexist. I'm a terrible, terrible misogynistic pig who's also white and a man. But that goes without saying. If I'm a terrible person, I'm definitely a man. Anyways, at least I don't have a blue beard, Because it's okay if you kill your wife, but it's not okay to have a blue beard. That's just socially unacceptable. I kind of like fairy tales, but they're very hit and miss. But anyways, the point of that article is that in part fairy tales were used not only to extol virtues of the day, but to try and give these aristocratic women a sense of empowerment, I suppose. See, I'm not like an expert. But if I had to guess, I would probably say that most fairy tales are just whatever. The moment I say it, someone's going to dispute it. That's part of why I don't like getting into like allegory and social justice and stuff. Because inevitably, like people are going to get offended and they're going to get really mad about it. And thankfully, like I don't have much of an audience, and the people that are here are like, well, we all know what they are, but like random strangers on the internet, like not necessarily to me, but to everyone else, get really angry, and they get really angry easily. So we need to prevent that. But for me, like I find that it's better to this sounds kind of stupid even as I say it. It's better to just tell a good story and let everyone else interpret it. Like that seems really obvious, but I think that's something that gets lost because people do like, especially when they get a degree and they go through college, because college, like they're not going to tell you, oh, this is a good story. They're going to be like, this story is important. This story is socially significant. This story tells us, how people used to pronounce English words back in 1643 AD. And you're sitting there and you're like, okay, what do I care? And then you forget it the moment you leave the class anyway. It's funny, like I like learning, and I enjoy being challenged. I really do. Like especially when it comes to like reading. But like when it comes to like schooling, it kind of gets on my nerves. It just strikes me as a bit self-righteous, and that, and even as I think about it, I feel like I'm being overly critical because people obviously are allowed their opinions, and a lot of this stuff is still like a problem. we like to think that Obama fixed everything and that there's no more racism or sexism, but there's totally all that stuff. And in fact, some sources are saying that it's actually getting worse. And part of the reasoning that people think it's getting worse is that they consider it to be pushback against social justice warriors and people getting offended on the internet. And this virtuous bullying that goes on. I remember reading this article fairly recently about how super 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 angry the YA community can be. Like the people that read YA books, like they just get so mad. I wonder if I can find that again, or if it would take me too long. Probably take me too long. Ugh. Let me see. Yeah, like this article, just as a quick look, um, from BuzzFeed News. Like the title is literally "YA Twitter can be toxic, but also points out real problems." And that's kind of like that's how people see it. Is that like as long as your intentions are good, it doesn't matter how you do it. Like you can be as mean and terrible as you can be, but as long as your intentions are good, it's fine. It's not a problem. Which is complete BS. No one's going to listen to me about this anyway, and the people that do listen to me about it aren't going to be able to change anything about it. But I don't know if I can find this book, or sorry, this article. But essentially, like, it was something that, like, about how, like, people, even, like, good people that were quote unquote woke, that were social activists and they were very politically correct. Um, like they would write a book and it would be from a perspective of like someone that isn't their race. Like a white woman would be writing this book that's supposed to be from this point of view of like an Asian person, and like YA Twitter would get so mad that like she just had to get off social media, that she had to try and pull her book. Like these people were basically her friends, like her platform. And it's not that she was saying anything they disagreed with, it was that she wasn't Asian. And so it ends up becoming this sort of well, first and foremost, it's this new generation of concerned moms. Because back when more people were getting married and having kids, like you would have these concerned moms who would just be like, I don't want my kids to be listening to rock and roll or playing video games all day. But now these ladies that would do that, like they're not getting married and they're not having kids, so they just get on Twitter and piss and moan about YA books. And second of all, it's completely blindsided. Can't see the forest for the trees. They're getting mad on principle, and they're keeping races separated by doing this. Like it is segregation, nothing short. It's not appropriation, it's segregation. People call for more diversity in literature and fiction. Then somebody from outside that circle tries to understand it, and they shut them down. Doesn't matter who it is. In this article that I'm thinking of had specific examples. I can't find it, unfortunately. But it's scary. Like it's not even like these were risque books. They're kids' books, YA. And they're not, again, they're not un-PC. They're not wrong in what they're saying. People just out of principle, will like harass a person off of social media. It's terrible and it's terrifying. It's kind of scary. Anyways, it makes me think about like Terry Pratchett said something profound. He said they always come back to the beginning. That's why they call them revolutions. He said something along those lines. Basically, what happens is there's a tyrant of cycle, or a tyrannical cycle. Basically, what will happen is a tyrant will rise up and he'll rule his nation with an iron fist and oppress the people, and then they will reach their breaking point and they will push back. And they'll push back and they'll overthrow him and they'll kill him and they'll take over the state. And when they do that, obviously they need a new system in place. And so they'll put people that are, good and virtuous and haven't done anything wrong. They'll put them in that position because obviously they don't want a tyrant. They want a good person. The problem is that once they're in that position of power, they start to realize that they need to protect that position. So they need to be careful about it. And then before they know it, they're slitting throats. They're dealing underhanded. They've become the tyrant that that they disposed of. William Blake said it another way. He said the iron hand crushed the tyrant's head and put a tyrant in its stead. The iron hand, like you rule with an iron fist, or you overthrow a tyrant with an iron hand, because that's what it takes. You need that strength. And then people end up using that strength, maybe with the right intentions, but to the wrong results. And it starts all over again every time. It cycles through it. There's no new thing under the sun. And we're kind of seeing that with social justice. People getting offended over everything. It's one thing if a person is like really, really genuinely toxic. Very few people that get targeted are that toxic. Most of them are, it's mostly reactionary. These, mentally ill people with too much time on their hands, too much time on social media, just harassing people. It's disgusting. And unfortunately, even if you agree with their points, you see this pushback. Like people are pushing back against that. I honestly think that's part of the reason why Donald Trump got elected, is because there were people pushing back. There were people that wanted to, show the quote unquote libtards who's boss. Anyways, that's a big issue, and that's part of why I don't like to talk about it, is because it's bigger than me. I can't solve that. At least not tonight. And there's so many variables and complications that even if I wanted to address it in full, like I could spend my whole life writing about it and still not get anything done. Because people always talk about revolution. Sometimes they even go through with it, but nothing really changes. The cycle starts over again. Animal Farm is the same way. Animal Farm is one of my favorite books. Um, it starts off, they overthrow the farmers, I should say, and then they become the dictators, even though they're not even technically the same breed of animal. And then the book ends. All animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. It's that slippery slope. It'll get you every time. And my favorite line from that book is at the very end. There's a bunch of pigs playing card games with human beings. Human beings, of course, are the farm animals' sworn enemies. Go read Animal Farm. It's really good. These pigs who are in charge are playing cards with human beings, even though they said that human beings are the enemy. And somebody cheats in the card game, so they all start accusing each other. The pigs are accusing the humans are accusing the pigs, and George Orwell wrote, "Neither can tell which is which." Ah, so great. I love that book. It was so good. Anyways, I'm gonna stop ranting. Thanks for listening to my voice. Next week is July 7th. Yeah, July 7th. Um, Thank you so much for coming on the stream. We should have a new song by then. I don't know if that one piano song will be done. I don't want to bother the guy about it because he is doing this out of the kindness of his heart rather than any manner of profit. Excuse me. Hopefully it'll be done. Hopefully I don't get sued. Hopefully I can keep doing my writing, and that way I can stop just talking about writing and actually do some writing instead of being one of those people that just talks about writing and never does any writing. Thank you so much for coming out. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Don't let your guilt crush you. Be nice to people even if you hate them. Have a good night. We'll see you next week.